Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are talking about series that I'm not going to be finishing. So these are series where I have read at least one book. I've completed at least the first book in the series, if not more than one book. But after that, I decided I'm going to DNF the series even though I finished a book. So I have 5 series to talk about. There are quite a few series actually that I have DNF'd. I always have a really hard time DNFing books, but not as hard a time DNFing series apparently. But today we're just talking about 5. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the Remnant Chronicles by Mary E. Pearson. So this has 3 books in the series. The first is The Kiss of Deception, the second is Heart of Betrayal, and the third is The Beauty of Darkness. And I have read the first 2 books in this series, but I've decided I am not going on to the third book. I almost didn't read the second book in this series because I was very unimpressed by the first one. So the first book starts out with following our main character, whose name I can't remember, who is a princess who is going to be married off in a political marriage. She doesn't want to be married off, and so she runs away. Then the prince that she was going to marry goes after her, but also someone sends an assassin after her. So there are 2 men who are trying to track her down. And in the first book, we don't really know which is which. We hear from both of their perspectives, but we don't know which perspective is the prince and which is the assassin. I thought the idea of what the author did was kind of interesting in that we get the perspectives of both of these characters, but we don't really know which one is which. The reason I am DNFing this though is, well, there are many reasons. One is that I can't stand the main character. I could not understand so many of the decisions that she made, and I couldn't stand her. So I really didn't want to read about her. I also was not invested in any of the relationships. We end up with a love triangle in this story, and it's not even a good love triangle. Like, I'm not a big fan of love triangles. I don't hate them, but I also am not like interested in them especially, and this was not a good love triangle, and I did not want to read more about it. And the romance element to this and the love triangle that's in it is, I would say, the majority of the story. And I remember with this series, one of my biggest complaints, but also one of the reasons I did at least try the second book, is because I thought the world had so much potential. The world that she created for this, I thought was really interesting. It had a lot of potential. It could have been really cool, but she didn't expand on it enough. She really didn't develop the world enough, for me at least. And so because the world I thought was really interesting and it had a lot of potential, that's why I wanted to at least try the second book. But the second book still did not develop the world, or at least not as much as I was interested in, or as much as I would have wanted it to. So it just felt like there was so much potential that was just wasted. The second series that I have on this list is one that I just recently read the first book and very quickly decided I'm not going to be continuing this, which is the Themis Files by Sylvain Nouvelle. The first book is Sleeping Giants. So this is a science fiction series that the first book at least starts with a young girl riding her bike and falling into a hole. She falls into a giant metal hand, and nobody knows where this metal hand came from, but it seems like after this event they just kind of forget about it. The little girl then grows up, she becomes a scientist, and she gets assigned to this team that happens to actually be researching this giant metal hand that she discovered as a child. So I just read this in July, and I talked about it in my July wrap-up. This is one that I think I can see why this is a fairly popular series, and I think there are a lot of things about it that could really appeal to people, but it's like really not my thing. So it's adult science fiction, which I do read science fiction, but for me I think this one was a little bit too like real world almost, because it feels very contemporary. It takes place in our world, kind of like an alternate modern day, and it deals a lot with, you know, more modern like politics between countries and governments and the military. It feels very realistic. It doesn't really feel that much like it's science fiction. It feels almost like it could really happen. And so that's something that I think a lot of people might like about it. For me, I don't really like that. I like science fiction that is a little more either spacey or a little more futuristic, or, you know, it's more different from modern day. This felt too much like reading a very scientific contemporary. I think also for me, the writing style or the setup of the book didn't work out for me, because it's set up in a way that we are reading like logs, journal entries, interviews, all of that kind of stuff, and not really like experiencing things with the characters. It creates a lot of distance between the reader and the story, because we're like reading an account of an interview that happened where someone is telling a story about something that already happened. And that's just like too many times too far removed for me, because I like to really feel like I'm in the story with the people when I'm reading. So I couldn't really get invested in it. I didn't really care about any of the characters that much or the plot at all. And I think something else that just created a lot of distance for me is that there was a lot of unknowns in the story. There's that tipping point where it's not enticing anymore. I just feel like I don't understand what's going on and I don't care anymore. So this one, I can see why people love it. It's really not for me though, and I'm not going to be continuing the series. This third one is one that probably won't be a surprise, because I've talked about a couple of times that I don't like this series, which is Missborne by Brandon Sanderson. So the first trilogy of Missborne has 3 books that are The Final Empire, The Well of Ascension, and The Hero of Ages. I have read The Final Empire, so only the first book. And that first book just like did not get me. I think Brandon Sanderson's writing style does not work for me. He tends to have a more like plain, straightforward kind of writing style, and I like things that are a little more lyrical or use more like metaphor in the writing. So I think his writing style was just too plain for me and my liking. I don't find it as engaging or immersive as other styles. And while I do think that his magic system is interesting, I didn't find it that exceptional. I know that people like go on and on about Brandon Sanderson and his magic systems, and like it's a cool magic system and it is well thought out, but I don't think that it's like that incredible. It just like didn't live up to the hype of it, and the things that I care about I don't feel like were really as present in the story as I would have wanted, especially because I didn't care about any of the characters in this story. I didn't care about any of the side characters. I didn't care about the 2 main characters. Kel was like, okay, and then Vin was just like, why is she even here? One of the things that really bothered me about this was that Vin's character, in the first book at least, is so pointless. Like, I think she becomes much more central in later books, and I hope that she becomes more useful in later books. But the first book, there was no reason for her to be in that book. She affected absolutely nothing. She did absolutely nothing. She could have completely disappeared and it probably wouldn't have made almost any difference. She could have been replaced by a houseplant and it would have been the same. And like, I don't want a story about a character like that. I don't find that interesting. There wasn't really anything that engaged me or enticed me or made me feel like I wanted to keep reading. Next, we have the only book that I still have the physical copy for, which is Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I read this a while ago. I read this before I was on BookTube, but this is the first book in the Red Rising series. So I know in the series there's Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star. I'm not sure if there are more books after that, or if the other books are like in the same world but are a different trilogy. So this follows Darrow, who is a red. So this world has essentially a caste system that is based on colors. Reds are one of the lowest in that system, and they mostly do like manual labor. And his family have for generations worked in these mines on Mars, that they are trying to mine a material that will help them to terraform the surface of Mars so that other people can live there. But he discovers that people have been living on the surface of Mars for a very long time, and just nobody ever told the Reds because it was easier to keep them in the mines and just use them as unknowing slaves, essentially. So he discovers that, and he gets wrapped up in this plot to take down the Golds. The Golds are, of course, the highest in this caste system of colors. And then he kind of enters into this fight to the death, Hunger Games kind of thing. So what I remember from this is that I do remember feeling like the story was kind of choppy, that there are like 2 to 3 sections in it that didn't feel like they really flowed together. I also didn't like the kind of like Hunger Games fight to the death thing that he got into. But I think the thing that bothered me the most with this one, again, is I could not stand his writing style. I could not stand it. I feel like Pierce Brown can write some really good quotes, but I think his writing style felt more like it was a series of quotes that he then strung together with a story. The writing would end up feeling kind of pretentious and kind of forced. And like he was trying really hard to make it be profound and make it be something. So it just felt like it was trying too hard. So really, I feel like Pierce Brown should write like poetry or something, because I think that he can create these very short but very impactful like statements and quotes that I think would work well for poetry, but I just don't feel like it worked as well in a novel. Not to say anything against Pierce Brown as a human being. I've seen interviews with him and he seems like a really nice, cool person, but like I just can't get on board with his writing style. And the last series that I have is the Parasol Protectorate series by Gail Carriger. So the first book in this is Soulless, the second is Changeless, the third is Blameless, fourth is Heartless, and the fifth is Timeless. So again, I've only read the first book from this, and I was really debating whether I was going to read the second one. I was considering it for a while. So this is a paranormal historical fantasy, I guess, urban fantasy. I think it takes place in like Victorian, like an alternate Victorian England where there are vampires and werewolves, and there are also people who are called soulless, who are able to kind of counteract the powers of werewolves and vampires. And they're very rare, but of course the main character that we're following is one of these soulless. She eventually gets kind of pulled into a plot and dramas that are happening with them. And then of course there is a romance. There were a lot of things that I was not a big fan of with this. For one, I was not a big fan of the way the main character was portrayed. She very much had that like, I'm not like other girls kind of thing going on. She was of course like the only female character pretty much in this that was not like vain and vapid. She was the only one who liked to read or learn about science or politics or like cared about anything other than dresses. She was always lamenting that she like had no other female friends to talk to about these kinds of things because no other girls care about that kind of stuff. It's only her, which I just like can't stand in a character. I felt like she also just made a lot of stupid decisions. She wouldn't take people's good advice. And then there is the problem that I didn't like the romance, and I think this is primarily a romance, and if you're not invested in it, it's not gonna work out well. And it had a trope that I am not a fan of. Like sometimes I can overlook it, but overall don't like, which is of course the supernatural being who is usually the guy who is like hundreds if not thousands of years old but looks young, and then the young girl who is actually young And then they're like, oh, but they look like they're the same age, so it's fine. And like, no, that's not how it works. And I just felt like so much of this book was just really not well done, not well written, and it just came across really cheesy, and I could not get into it. So those are 5 series that I'm not going to be finishing. I am DNFing the series. Let me know if you have read any of these, if you agree or disagree with me. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye. Hey Timber, hi cutie boy, come here. Come here, come here, come here, come here. Ready? Ooh. Up we go. All right, Timber, can you look over there? Look at the camera. Oh, that's a cute boy. Look at you being a cutie. You look very silly. You're a good boy. Mwah. Okay. All right, off you go. Oh, that's good. You good boy. You did a good job. You looked at the camera.